This is the beginning of the 1985 Iditarod race across Alaska, the greatest dog sled race in the world. The race will last 2 weeks, winding 1,100 miles through the Alaska wilderness from Anchorage to Nome. Susan Butcher, the most famous woman dog racer in history, has placed second in this race twice, but she's never won. This year, she is favored to win. Suddenly, just after dusk on the second day, Susan sees the ears of her lead dogs go up. Then her headlights capture the most dreaded sight of all for a dog musher. Instinctively, she throws the sled over to stop, but it's too late. The moose is already charging into her team, kicking and snorting, sharp hooves slashing at the helpless leashed dogs. The moose continued to charge into the team for almost 20 minutes, killing 2 dogs and injuring 13 others. In minutes, the race that could have been her greatest triumph has become the greatest tragedy of her career. As the other mushers came into the checkpoint, they were stunned by the news of Susan's accident.
David, I got stopped by a moose. Johnny's dead, Hyde's borderline. Maddie, Yeller, co-pilot, Cracker, Ruff, all have concussions. So I didn't even see it. I just went up over the hill, saw some dog's ears go up, and that was it. But by the time I crested the hill, the moose was already completely in the middle of the team, stomping the team down. Other moose that I've run into have tromped through the team and then charged off. So I expected her to just continue all the way back through the team, go hit me. I've been hit a lot of times by the moose but then just keep running, look for an out. She wasn't looking for any out. She just wanted to stay right in the middle of the team. And I tried waving things at her, and I tried poking at her and stuff, and nothing would make her move. Even when she had a pretty clear shot out past the leader, she'd just stay right in there amongst the dogs, kicking them.
Dewey Halverson had caught up with Susan after 20 minutes and shot the moose.
I went up as close into our team as close as I dared. That moose was right in the middle, and it just stomped the dickens out of those dogs. And I shot twice and hit it, and it went up and kicked some of the front dogs again, and I shot, and the fourth shot put it down.
A lot of my dogs I bought from Susan. And it's one of those things, it's like a car accident or anything else. It happens, and it's sad when it does, and it's got to be awesome. I've met a lot of moose on the trail, but I've never had one jump my team.
Susan flew her wounded dogs back to Anchorage for medical help. She was present in the operating room during surgery, and when she was certain she had done all she could, she took the injured dogs home. Even with Susan out of the race, 1985 was to be the woman's year of the Iditarod after all, in the person of Libby Riddles of Teller. Libby had not received the amount of publicity that Susan had over the years, but she was an experienced musher, entering her first Iditarod in 1980. Her upset victory came from a bold and daring move. She and the other leading mushers were caught in a storm at Shaktoolik, a ground blizzard with winds gusting to 50 miles an hour. Libby set out into the teeth of the storm, while the other mushers waited it out. That daring gamble paid off, and her lead was established for the rest of the race.
I made an agreement with myself before I left that if I take off, I wasn't going to come back, even if it's crummy.
She got a jump on us early the next morning, apparently. That's when we were drinking her coffee and looking at the weather and checking the ham radio reports, and we should have been bootying up the dogs and, getting on down the road.
That was a good move that she made leaving there. I thought it was a little foolish and she didn't get too far out of Shaktoolik last night. But she was able to head out the trail early this morning. This morning, Shaktoolik looked really bummed.
From Shaktoolik on, Libby held tenaciously to the lead her gamble had given her. She arrived triumphantly in Nome as the first woman ever to win the Iditarod.
Welcome to Nome, Libby. Congratulations.
Guys, now it's okay.
Libby winning, especially at the time frame that she won, which was only 2 weeks after the moose thing had happened, and when I still had many of the live dogs that had lived through it. They were still at the vets. I was still concerned, were they all going to pull through? I was in deep mourning, and yes, it was insult to injury of sorts, but it's the lesser of the problems that occurred that year. And you know, I was happy for Libby, and really her win had nothing to do with me.
While Susan regretted being put out of the race, that regret paled beside the intense emotional grief from the loss and mutilation of her dogs. She had raised Hyde and Johnny, the 2 dogs killed, from birth, and the 13 others, battered and torn by the moose's hammering hooves, were also her children, her family, her friends. She had cuddled them, fed them, walked them, and run them all for thousands of hours. She did not have the luxury of time for grieving. The other dogs still needed attention. She returned to the kennel, and the rhythm of life went on, as it always will. If hard work is the cure for sorrow, then Susan's everyday life has that in plenty. She takes care of over 160 dogs, including 60 puppies.
I raise them and start working with them from literally the day they're born. We pick them up about once a day, usually petting them, blowing on their faces so they get used to actually human smell and everything, and they know that you're a nice person. By the time they're 3 weeks old, then usually we start feeding them, and they can crawl around, so you can start playing with them a little bit. Part of what makes a winning musher as opposed to someone who only comes in 20th or 40th is definitely the person's ability to relate to the dogs. When they're 8 weeks old, I start taking them on walks. And I feel that this is really important. We go anywhere from 1 mile to 7 miles. And what they're learning is that the funnest part of the day and the most exciting part is when they're with a person. I take them through creeks, over big trees, you know, over difficult obstacles. I see who's willing to come with me no matter what.
Good girl.
So by the time you've got them ready for a race, what you've kind of taught them is to want to know what's around the next bend.
Susan had been alone for 7 years. Her only regular companions, the dogs. She knew she wanted a family life, but also knew that her lifestyle would make it difficult to find the right man. Then, half a year after her tragic loss, Susan found a new family. In August, she was married to longtime friend David Munson.
One night I went to Manly to attend the miners' ball. If you have not danced in Manly, you've never danced at all. And I met a northern beauty there who turned my head around. She was broad of beam, and when she danced, she shook the frozen ground. She was as strong as any man, she was as fair as she was wide. And when the dance was over, I asked her to be my bride.
Marrying David fulfilled Susan's desire for a family life that included the dogs as a central part.
It's been really very good for me. It's given me a constant companion who is as interested in the dogs as I am. And I think that was the one big thing missing from my life in the years when I didn't have anybody.
When you have a common goal, when people are working together in a marriage or anything else, what you're trying to do is accomplish something. And as long as at a certain point in the day, you're done with your job and now you're just living your life and trying to get along the way everybody else does, I think all the rest of the day's compromises are brought into proper perspective.
Like her lifestyle, Susan's dogs are part of the tradition of Alaska. To the mushers, the breed of dog is not important. It's only the character of individual dogs that matters.
The type of dog that I use to race with is called an Alaskan Husky. Now, this is not an AKC registered breed, but it's a breed that's been used as a working dog for sled dogs for hundreds of generations. We don't care what's in them. We care that they have endurance, speed. What they have inside their heads is real important. You need that husky to have that heart and that drive to want to go.
During the summer and fall, when there is little or no snow, Susan uses an all-terrain vehicle to run her dogs.
Serious training starts August 1st, and that's going short distances of just 3 miles a day. I finally build them up in December to runs between 25 miles and 75 miles in a day. And then throughout the entire year, right through the 1st of March, I'm just running each and every one of these dogs 3 to 4 times a week. And finally in March, I cull them down to approximately 20 dogs that have everything that I'm looking for the Iditarod. Generally, every year, I'm training between 50 and 60 dogs that are of the right ability and the right age to run in the Iditarod. At 4 months, we start breaking them to our dog walker. For some reason, dogs are perfectly happy to run around in circles for 45 minutes. But then what I'm getting to do there is see their gait. And that is ultimately the most important thing to me when it comes to picking a dog for my racing team. I'm looking for the smoothest and, of course, the fastest gait.
Susan is not only mother, companion, friend, and trainer to her dogs, she is their doctor as well.
Being a veterinary technician, working for a veterinarian, I learned enough to be able to do a whole lot of veterinary work myself. And living 150 miles from the closest vet, that is a great advantage for me. I get to do a lot of my own work.
The drama of the Iditarod captures us. The public sees the achievement, but can never see what lies behind it, what makes it possible. For Susan, the Iditarod is not a 2-week event, but occupies her all year round.
We work 7 days a week, all year long. Just like a farmer, because you've got animals, you've got to be there for them. We get up around 7 o'clock. First thing is to water all the dogs. What we have to do is haul our water from the creek. We have no running water, so we use about 100 gallons a day. In the morning, we make them up an actual broth with ground beef and warm water, and we mix that in then with the dry dog food and put it into buckets and go around to each dog and give it to them in their pans. Just feeding alone, if you were one person here, is about a 6-hour job with watering, feeding, and just the caring of the dogs. I got my first dog when I was 4 years old, and he soon became the most important thing in my life. And we lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and there was a leash law. So my parents, when I got to be 11 years old, said we couldn't keep him any longer unless I was willing to walk him every morning, every afternoon, every night. So before I went to school, I had to walk the dog, and when I came home, I had to walk the dog, and in the evening I had to. And that's what I looked forward in life. And I would go out and round up, because it isn't true, even though there was a leash law, that everybody kept their dogs on a leash. And I would wander the neighborhood. I knew where different dogs lived. We'd pick them up, and off we'd go. And I just would travel with a pack of dogs for half hour, an hour. I started learning a lot of what I know today way back then, as far as what dogs are thinking and how they communicate to a person who's willing to listen. And what's happened now, as I've been working with the Alaskan Huskies, I find that they're constantly talking, and that each of their barks is very different, and it's not just a barking dog or a howling dog. And they have, I'd say, 5 or 6 different howls that I can tell if it's a happy howl, a change of the weather howl, a sad howl, or what it is. The bitches, when they're in heat, have an amazing howl, which is incredibly flirtatious.
In the early 1970s, she left Cambridge, Massachusetts for the open spaces of Colorado, where she had her first experience mushing. Within a couple of years, even Colorado was too confining. The logic of her life led her inevitably to the ultimate place where she could combine her love of dogs and love of wilderness, Alaska. For the world public and the media, the big race is the Iditarod. But other races offer opportunities for the mushers to hone their skills and just have a good time. This is the Coldfoot Classic, and it's a trip back in time to the tough and friendly competition between dog teams. There's no commercial hype here, and there's no $50,000 prize. First prize in the Coldfoot Classic is a pickup truck. Although the Coldfoot Classic is informal, the competition is tough. Gathered here are the best mushers in Alaska.
Number 18.
Please.
There it is. I got this. Susan Butcher.
29.
29.
They have a start out totally different than any other race. The musher and one other person called a handler are laying in our sleeping bags. The race marshal just shoots off a gun, and you jump out of your sleeping bag. You have to pack your sleeping bag then. You have to harness all the dogs, put them into their places in the team, pack your sled, and then go. And so it's just whoever can do that fastest.
The rugged life of dog mushing attracted Susan to Alaska's wilderness.
My parents, both my mother and my father, really taught me no bounds. They did not differentiate between me as a woman and anybody else. We didn't have a brother growing up with us until I was 15 years old. So it was just my sister and I, and if we said, hey, we want to go do this, nobody said, well, that's something that boys usually do. So I don't think that I even knew till I was 18 years old that there were people out there that wanted to limit me because I was a woman.
After the hectic start, the mushers settle in for the 350-mile race. Part of the Coldfoot Trail parallels the Alaskan Pipeline. After the pipeline road, the trail turns into the gates of the Arctic National Park, unquestionably some of the most beautiful terrain in the north. 200 miles from the start is the Eskimo village of Anaktuvik. The people of Anaktuvik, 200 of them, were once scattered and nomadic. Now they are settled, but the village is still completely isolated from the outside world. The only access is by dog sled or bush plane. The arrival of the Coldfoot mushers in Anaktuvik is the great social event of the year for the village. The Eskimos compete to give the mushers their traditional hospitality. Susan didn't win this race. She came in third. The Coldfoot Classic brings back the old days of mushing in Alaska. Dog sled teams are a product of the land and of Alaska's history. For centuries, the Eskimos and Indians of the interior had used working dog teams as the only practical transportation across the vast spaces. For all its beauty, the long winters are hostile to the fragile species of man, and in the tradition of the frontier, people helped each other or died. It was from this tradition that the trail they call the Iditarod emerged, named after a tiny village in the interior. The trail's place in history was made in 1925 when the gold mines of the interior were swept by a devastating epidemic of diphtheria. Without life-saving serum, thousands of isolated miners would die. In midwinter, the precious serum was rushed to Nome by dog team, and the bold rescue mission caught the imagination of the country. By the late 1920s, modern technology in the form of bush planes had virtually made the Iditarod Trail obsolete, but the dramatic life-saving mission to Nome had become an indelible part of the Alaskan legend. By the early 1970s, a group of Alaskans had conceived the idea of a modern race along the old route. Such a race would not only be a great sporting event, it would be a tribute to the spirit of Alaska. The frontier values of the true Alaska would come alive again. Among the planners was Joe Reddington, known as the father of the Iditarod. Joe is an old-time musher who is renowned not only for his skill, but for his encouragement of young mushers. One of the first two women who entered the Iditarod was Mary Shields in 1974. She placed 23rd, and Lolly Medley was 24th. Both were out of the money, but they put to rest for all time the myth that women could not finish the race without help. After 1974, women mushers were an increasing presence. By 1978, a woman had finished in the top 20 for the first time. It was Susan Butcher in her first Iditarod. Recently, even some women from foreign countries have entered, like Nina Hotvedt of Norway.
I do whatever my dogs can. As long as my dogs hold up, I'm gonna hold up.
The modern Iditarod Trail runs 1,100 miles from Anchorage to Nome on the Bering Sea. The trail runs through the spectacular Rainy Pass and out into the desolate landscape known as the Farewell Burn. The historical town of Iditarod itself, almost at mid-race, is now deserted except when the race passes through. The racers reach the Bering Sea at the Eskimo village of Unalakleet. The last several hundred miles follow the frozen coastline of the Bering Sea to the finish line at Nome. There are approximately 60 mushers entered, each starting with a team of 16 to 18 dogs. The logistics of the race are formidable. Tons of dog food are deposited at checkpoints along the trail, and each musher is responsible for his or her own team's food. Most Iditarod workers are volunteers. Even the military turns the Iditarod into a training maneuver by airlifting food and supplies for the teams. If a dog becomes sick or injured on the trail, the musher carries it to the next checkpoint where professional veterinarians are ready to help. These veterinarians also inspect every dog of every team that passes through.
Keeping the dogs hydrated and mentally fit for running is the biggest problem. If you get a dog that's run so much that it's dehydrated, it refuses to eat. And if it refuses to eat, it will refuse to drink, and a vicious circle is started. And more injuries happen, and the dog will finally quit. It just won't want to run anymore.
The rules protecting the health of dogs are strict and absolute. The welfare of the animals is the #1 priority of mushers and support crews alike. The musher's task during the race is partly navigation, partly strategy, but above all, caring for the dogs. For the mushers themselves, the risks are plentiful. It's easy to lose the skimpily marked trail in bad weather, and accidents can put an end to anyone's ambition.
Hell, I went rolling through the air like I was shot out of a cannon. I tumbled 3 times down the side of that one hill there in Happy River. I almost killed a dog there, had him hung up against a tree. He was being choked, and I had to take a knife and cut the harness nut to get him out.
Military helicopters are used for rescue operations. Word has come from the trail that Colonel Norman Vaughn is down and injured. He's been firing flares at passing aircraft for 24 hours. Colonel Vaughn is over 80. After a half-hour search, the colonel is spotted. Vaughn is down with fractured ribs.
You feeling all right, Norman?
Warm?
Warm?
Not warm, but I feel all right.
You know what day it is?
Saturday, I think.
Okay.
It's awful sore on that side, you see.
Which side?
Your
right side. Right side.
In spite of painful injuries, Colonel Vaughn will be on the Iditarod Trail again next year. And even those who finish have to contend with some of the most inhospitable terrain on the face of the earth. For 2 weeks, the mushers catch only minutes of sleep at checkpoints or along the trail, and by the end, hallucinations are common. They're pushed to the ultimate limit of endurance. From its beginning, the modern Iditarod race has captured the imagination of the world. It's a media event with all of the trappings of the high-tech world. Cameras, satellite feeds, and air support, and crowds of reporters that sometimes seem to outnumber the mushers.
Trail well marked. Pretty good.
Does it feel like a race yet? Or?
Yeah.
The media likes nothing better than putting a few grizzled mushers in a rustic cabin and letting them look Alaskan.
Cowboy Smith just came in.
Did he ask for me?
3 years, I've never gotten Cowboy Smith on tape once. Never, ever. Not one syllable.
I think the coverage of the Iditarod is challenging.
It is now 5 minutes of 1. I will be up and filing at 5 minutes after 6.
But then, you're 300 miles, 200 miles from a phone.
While the Iditarod is full of physical hazards for the mushers, it also has risks for the race officials and sponsors. Perhaps the most unsettling moment came in the '83 race. A major sponsor had arranged a special celebration for the first musher to arrive at the checkpoint. An elaborate candlelight dinner with imported chefs and prime steaks flown in from Colorado, waiters in tuxedos. This was a production, no question about it. Trouble was, the first musher to come in was Cowboy Smith. The legendary Cowboy Smith, the most taciturn man south of the North Pole. The man who never said anything. The man who not only wouldn't answer questions, but was acutely embarrassed if anyone else was even around. While Cowboy feeds his dogs, race officials bring to bear all the persuasive power they can muster. Smith goes along with it. He's even very communicative. An eyebrow lift from Cowboy Smith is like a novel from anyone else. He's given $1,000 bills as part of the prize. But as cooperative as he's been, Cowboy's lost his appetite. Most of the crowd finally has to vacate the room, and at last Cowboy Smith can eat the way he likes it. Alone. Afterwards, Cowboy grants a rare interview.
Could you think of a worse bunch of people to spend a candlelight dinner with than the press?
No.
For the 1986 Iditarod, Susan was forced to build a new team after the tragedy of 1985 when she lost her best dogs in the moose attack. Working from dawn to dusk, running team after team, she finally selects her best 20 that will carry her to Nome. The 1986 Iditarod will prove to be the dramatic test of Susan's determination. There is a bittersweet flavor to this race. Last year's winner, Libby Riddles, is not competing, but her companion, Joe Garney, is. And Joe is to be Susan's toughest competition, racing with the top flight team that had won in '85. Her other major threat this year is Rick Swenson, who has already won 4 times and is determined to get back on top. Joe Garney starts fast and takes the lead out of Anchorage. By the morning of the second day, the leaders are beginning to ascend spectacular Rainy Pass. They'll climb 2,000 feet in 20 miles. By the second night, Rick Swenson has taken the lead from Joe Garney.
Oh yeah, they were interesting, but it's always interesting coming through there, so. You know? Yeah. It's not a very good place to be sleepy.
Dewey Halverson, the musher who came to Susan's rescue last year, is suddenly struck with a fatal accident in his own team.
You're standing on the brake with all your weight, and the dogs are still just going full bore. And I had a dog drop and was drugged by the neck line, and it choked him. So, I don't know. Not much to say about it.
Yeah.
I wish it hadn't happened. Feels awful to sit there and watch it.
By the next morning, the mushers are beginning the descent from Rainy Pass. The trail down winds through the narrow chute called the Dalzell Gorge. The gorge is tough going, and Susan has a scare when her lead dogs fall through a hole in river ice.
So I ran up there, and there they were about 4 feet down on some more shelf ice down below, just looking out of the hole, looking up at me. So I was real worried, because if the sled still went, they could have killed them. So, you know, if the dogs went. So I just kept telling the dogs to be easy, and I got back, I chopped a hole in the ice, put the snow hook in it. And once I had that done, then I had time, and I took my axe. I had to cut I don't know how both of them went in it, because I had to cut the hole bigger to get them both out. And then I cut the hole, and they called them up, and they put their paws up, and I yanked them out.
Beyond the Dalzell Gorge is a 90-mile stretch of snowless desolation, the Farewell Burn. The race slows to a crawl. Garney is first into the McGrath checkpoint, winning the traditional $1,000. Susan is second.
You gonna go for that $2,000, Joe?
Oh, I don't know. I'm gonna go for no. You know, that's all I'm doing right now.
But the Iditarod is notorious for humbling the leaders. The very next morning, Garney loses a trail, and it takes him hours to get back on track.
I've lost like 40 miles, 40 extra miles. It's going to take something else to recover this. It's like getting a shot in the end of the nose. Makes your eyes water. You can't roll with a punch.
Garney's mistake will haunt him for the rest of the race. It is touch and go for 1,000 miles, with the lead changing back and forth. By the Ruby checkpoint, Susan is back in the lead. Rick Swenson pulls in only a couple of hours behind.
I think, you know, there's about 8 real good teams. I don't believe the race isn't over. We're just kind of getting ready to start here.
Even after losing 40 miles, Joe Garney's dogged determination brings him back up with the leaders.
I've been doing a lot of figuring out how I was going to catch these guys. I've been working at it. While they've been sitting down on them chairs and riding, I've been running. When they're drinking coffee, I've been walking and gaining on them.
The predictions are coming true. By the 10th day, 200 miles from the finish, it's finally clear the race is between Susan and Joe Garney. Joe Garney is a good friend. He's a tough, experienced musher who was one of the first to befriend Susan when she began racing. But this is the Iditarod, and competition is competition. She has no intention of losing to Joe. 70 miles from Nome, Joe takes the lead, and his dogs look good. He holds the lead almost all day, but at dusk, Susan catches him again. Now the two mushers are using every strategy they can muster to confuse each other, including running through the Arctic night without lights.
She was at one time about 5 miles behind me, and I thought she was definitely going to be catching me up.
Did that make you drive faster?
No, it just made me smarter. I went without lights. I knew she didn't know where I was, and I was hoping she was driving hard to catch me. And I just staying ahead of her.
How in the world could you see without lights?
That's what I always used to brag. Eskimos can see in the dark.
Well, once or twice I thought I saw lights in front of me and behind me, and I didn't know when I left Unalakleet. They told me Joe Garney was still there, so I thought that I was first out, but it was pretty obvious after I'd gone about 5 miles that there was a track in front of me, so I figured it wasn't Joe.
70 miles from Nome, somebody asks Joe if there's going to be a sprint to the finish. He just laughs. The dogs are down to a 7-mile-an-hour trot. Nobody, says Joe, is going to be sprinting anywhere. And then he sprints. By now, the two mushers are exhausted, beaten down by the 40 below zero cold, 10 days with little sleep, broken sleds, collapsed dogs. They're like a pair of punch-drunk boxers, circling slowly, counter-punching when they can, just wanting desperately to finish. Now they race through the night, single file across the ridges of sea ice. Only 20 miles from the finish, Susan catches and passes Garney for the last time. Exhausted and hallucinating, she pushes forward with the last of her strength. She no longer knows how far she is ahead or where Joe is. She only knows the last-ditch determination of the endurance athlete to finish.
See her, the winner of the 1986 Iditarod, Susan Butcher, coming down the chute.
It took her 8 years, but Susan Butcher has finally realized her dream and won the Iditarod. She has shattered the record by 17 hours.
11 days, 15 hours is waiting for the exact time, and who really cares, huh?
Right. But I can tell it was fast because it was, I'm tired than normal.
Susan Butcher has not only won, she is the fastest musher ever to run the Iditarod Trail. As reigning champion, Susan often appears in public. She may be representing her sponsors or receiving professional awards. She frequently uses her personal experiences as the basis for her talks.
We had no time to sleep or think of anything this year. The sleep I had at Caltech was the longest sleep I had in the whole race. Usually I was getting 2 hours of sleep a day. So I did a lot of hallucinating this year. We were out on the coast where there are no trees. You're above the Arctic tree line. And I was standing on the back of the runners, and the trail's not marked very well at all. And we were in a blizzard, and I couldn't really see very well in front of me. And my dogs got off the trail. And Joe Garney was right behind me, and he followed me off the trail. And I put in the snow hook, which stops the sled, and I walked back to Joe, and I said, Joe, this is going to be so hard. The trail's over there. We got to go through this forest over there. And he goes, what forest? And I go, well, we got to wind the dogs through all these trees. And he goes, Susan, there aren't any trees here. I got into the sport of dog mushing, really to get away from people and to live out in the bush and to be alone. And having done well in the sport, I've gained a lot of notoriety. And so it's been rather difficult for me to learn how to deal with it, but really on a day-to-day basis, my life is no different. I have been able to use my notoriety to help other people with through Special Olympics, through March of Dimes. Currently, I'm working with the American Cancer Society, and hopefully I'll spark somebody's interest in quitting smoking. So all these types of things really make you feel good and make you feel good about your notoriety.
Susan Butcher is our state honorary chairperson. I'm sure you all know who she is, so I'm going to let her come up here.
Fame really has nothing to do with you, and it has nothing to do with what's going on here, and that just because people may know my name doesn't mean that I don't have to work just as hard every day at what I love in order to stay good.
Now, 1 year after her record-setting win, she's at the starting line again. Susan's challenge is to prove that her '86 victory wasn't a fluke. With the increased notoriety, she's become a target of the top mushers, the one to beat, and of all the mushers who want to show that women haven't become the new masters of the trail, none is more determined than four-time winner Rick Swenson.
I've been more consistent than anybody else. Anybody thinks that I'm washed up's dreaming. There's too many good teams now to just do it on just strictly dogs alone. You gotta have equal dogs, and then you gotta have either some good luck or no bad luck.
You gotta watch your competitors, and then you just gotta go for it. And, you know, I feel I came here with a very strong team. I haven't gotten to see all my competitors, but the ones I have seen, I'm faster than.
But early in this race, as in 1985, Susan's team is struck with tragedy. Only a mile out of the first checkpoint, one of her leaders, Jackie, suddenly dies.
She led me out of Anchorage, and she was in swing the whole way and just doing great. And then it wasn't a mile from here. She just tipped over. And, you know, I was up there in seconds, and she was gone, and I gave her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and did nothing.
A later autopsy showed that Jackie died of a hereditary liver problem. The 1987 race has at least 8 first-rate teams. Dewey Halverson and Jerry Austin decide to run their teams together, becoming the rabbits of the race. They set a fast pace, getting out front and staying there, trying for a big lead early on, and hoping they can hold that pace all the way to Nome.
I want to win, but I'm not predicting who's going to be the winner. It's going to be a tough race. I know this, I can't be racing Susan out of Unalakleet. I'm wasting my time right now.
It will take a week before Halverson and Austin know if their gamble pays off. Susan and Rick Swenson, the 2 top contenders, are content to fall in behind, following the rabbits, checking each other out, falling into the long rhythm of the trail. Up into Rainy Pass, across the Farewell Burn. By midnight, all the leaders arrive at the Athabascan village of Nikolai. During the night, Rick Swenson has caught the leaders.
I caught them out there, so I stopped them. Rested my dogs for about 3 hours, but I didn't tell anybody else that I'd caught them, so they just kept right on going, and hopefully they burned their dogs a little bit doing it.
Dogs are looking as good as they're looking. I mean, they want to go. I mean, every time we stop, even right out here at Salmon River, 12 miles out of town, we stop to throw them a piece of fish, and they're all barking to go, and they pull the hook out. And as long as they're doing that.
We may be pushing everybody else, but we're pushing to win.
After a break only long enough to feed the dogs, the leaders are back on the trail. At the halfway point, the village of Iditarod, Dewey Halverson and Jerry Austin, still the leaders, are first in.
I'm glad to be in Iditarod. I need a nap.
Dewey takes the halfway prize of $2,500, which Jerry had won last year.
Now, the ones that fall on the ground, the spectators get to keep.
No, no way.
It's almost an impossible pace to hold. You know, we've just been going so fast. A little short on rest.
Does that mean you've been pushing them?
No, we haven't been pushing the dogs, but we've been pushing ourselves.
Susan Butcher is close behind in number 3 position, just where she wants to be. "625 miles from Anchorage, the leaders are still together after 6 days. While Susan tends her dogs, Jerry Austin takes the lead again. As Dewey Halverson passes along the Yukon River on the 8th day, the wind is howling.
The lower you can get, you know, the less wind resistance, it makes quite a difference. But geez, your knees are just killing you because you're riding the sled on your knees a lot.
In these extreme conditions, Susan's team has always performed well. After patiently following 10 minutes behind the rabbits, along the Yukon, she makes her move into the lead.
I've done the best I can with my Volkswagen, or maybe I don't have a Volkswagen. Maybe I've got a souped-up Ford or something, but I'm not driving the Porsche. Doesn't mean that I'm giving up or anything like that. Just means that Susan passed us at this point in the race, so we're still not to Nome yet.
Here at the Caltag checkpoint, the villagers surround the incoming mushers. Jerry Austin now sees the race a little differently.
The only team I think that, you know, unless there's a problem on the coast with a storm or something like that, Rick's the only one that I think may be able to beat her, but I haven't run with him. I've been running up front, so I don't know how fast he is. But he'd better be a little bit faster than Dewey or me, or it's going to be come to Alaska where men are men and women are men.
Susan's strategy has more to do with the condition of her dogs than the speed of her opponent.
I personally wouldn't be here if my team didn't look good. I would put them wherever they would still be looking good, because that's still the name of the game. We got a long ways to go.
Just after dawn the next morning, Susan arrives at the Bering Sea, the village of Unalakleet. Rick Swenson is beginning to press forward and comes in close behind.
Not worried about anybody.
You think this is your race?
Well, I'm just driving my own dogs.
They won't tell you when they're going to move out, what time. And they'll sneak, each and one of the dog mushers will sneak. They won't tell till even the checkers, they tell the checkers to keep quiet because they don't want them to find out.
The leaders are now only 250 miles from Nome. Through the hills along the Bering Sea, the mushers run up every incline, helping their dogs as much as they can. Susan is in the lead. For Jerry Austin, the pace he has set for 900 miles has finally taken its toll. He will not lead the race again.
I'm just hoping that if it's Rick or Susan, whoever it is that wins, I hope they do set a record, because then Dewey and me will be part of it, dragging them all the way to the coast, you know.
Susan's team is still healthy and strong. She leads onto the ice at Norton Sound. The Iditarod has now entered the last leg, and it's become a duel between the masters. Susan Butcher and Rick Swenson pulling into the last stretch to Nome. By mid-afternoon, Susan is less than 100 miles from the finish, pulling into the checkpoint at Elam. But before she even feeds her dogs, Swenson arrives.
Yeah, she's just about sick and tired of me. I'm sure she is. That's all right. Good for her. She did it to Garney last year.
And now the sprint begins in earnest. Unexpectedly, Swenson leaves only 30 minutes later, ahead of Susan. Susan scrambles to catch up, but still leaves Elam 10 minutes behind. But 25 miles later, Susan is in the lead again. Swenson has pulled off the trail outside Elam and let her pass, gauging her strength and endurance.
Fire, about 12 minutes to go.
How do you feel at this point about catching her, passing her, and beating her?
Well, I'm going to do my very best to do all three. I know I'm going to see her at least once more at White Mountain, so I get that consolation. Hopefully I'll see her a couple more times besides that. And hopefully I'll pass her and not see her again. But that's what the whole thing is all about. We've been dicing this out for 9.5 days. Now it's coming down to the wire. We're going to find out. Gentlemen, are you ready? All right.
By midnight, Susan has gained 17 minutes on Swenson.
I gained that 17 minutes, some of it, I think, because my team was doing a little better now. It depends on how they do tonight and tomorrow morning, but, you know, you can catch it. If the better team is behind, 17 minutes is not enough. If the better team's in front, then 17 minutes is plenty. So we'll find that out tomorrow.
I figure the only way I'm going to make up that time on her is if she has trouble, like hauls a dog or something like that. The teams are just real evenly matched speed-wise, I feel. And so I figure the only way I'm going to make up any time on her, at least between here and safety, is if she makes a mistake. Well, I just really want to make her as miserable as I can, that's all. That's all that matters. That's the only reason I'm hanging in there.
Truth?
That's the truth.
How come?
Just because she thinks she's so damn good. And what it really is she's real fortunate to have an exceptionally good leader right now at this point in her life. And when she doesn't have that dog anymore, she's going to realize that she's not quite as good as she thinks she is. That's what I think.
What is it within you that helps you do that after running a dog team 10 days?
Drive. I've been running up every hill. I got drive.
From this point on, Susan never loses the lead and doesn't see Rick Swenson on the trail again. At last, at 11 o'clock in the morning, Susan Butcher wins her second Iditarod. She has cut an amazing 13 hours off the record she set last year.
Welcome, Bill. It's 11 days, 2 hours, 5 minutes, and 13 seconds.
Well, way up in Alaska, the state that stands alone, there's a dog race run from Anchorage in the Nome. And it's a grueling race with a lightning pace where the chilly winds do wail beneath the northern lights across snow and the ice, and it's called the Iditarod Trail. Well, give me a team and a good lead dog and a sled that's built so fine, and let me race those miles to Nome 1049. Then when I get back to my home, hey, I can tell my tale. I did the Iditarod Trail. Well, the race, it won't be easy for the masters of the trail, and some of them will make it and some of them will fail. But just to run that race takes a tough and a hardy breed, and a lot of work done by the dogs that run across snow with a whistle and speed. Well, give me a team and a good lead dog and a sled that's built so fine, and let me race those miles to Nome 1049. Then when I get back to my home, hey, I can tell my tale. I did the Iditarod Trail.
Susan won again in 1988, the first musher to win the Iditarod 3 times in a row. She has built her life around 2 of her great loves, dogs and the wilderness. And with the determination and spirit of a pioneer, she has become one of the best mushers in the world.
Well, just pulled out of safety. I'm on the trail all alone. I'm doing fine and picking up time and running on in the gnome. There are no sled tracks in front of me and no one on my tail. I did the Iditarod Trail. Well, give me a team and a good lead dog and a sled that's built so fine, and let me race those miles to Nome 1049. Then when I get back to my home, hey, I can tell my tale. I did the Iditarod Trail. I did the Iditarod Trail. I did